Billionaire's son threw coke at black waitress, not knowing she was his long-lost sister. What if the person who humiliated you, who treated you like you were invisible, turned out to be your brother? The air in Lucille was thick with the scent of rosemary and wealth. Crystal glasses clinked, and low laughter floated from tables where Los Angeles's richest dined. Tasha Williams, 24, navigated the maze of patrons with a tray balanced expertly on one hand. Her black uniform was pressed to perfection, but her dark skin, her tightly coiled hair, and her quiet resilience made her invisible to the guests. To them, she was just the help, a cog in the machine of their opulent evening. But Tasha carried a fire inside her, a dream of becoming a graphic designer, of escaping the grind of her South Central upbringing, where survival was a daily battle. Raised by her grandmother, Ruth, in a neighborhood where hope was as scarce as opportunity, Tasha had learned to keep her head down. Her mother, Lena, had vanished when Tasha was 5, leaving behind only whispers of a troubled past and a single photograph tucked in Ruth's old Bible. Tasha's childhood was marked by the sounds of sirens and the weight of racial prejudice, slurs muttered in passing, doors slammed shut before she could even knock. Yet, she clung to her sketches, late-night doodles of vibrant designs that held the promise of a better life. At Lucille, she endured the microaggressions, patrons snapping their fingers, dismissing her with a glance, because the tips were good, and every dollar brought her closer to her dream. Tonight, though, the weight of it all felt heavier. Her feet ached from hours on the marble floor, and her smile was harder to muster. As she approached table 12, she noticed a man in a navy Armani suit, his posture tense, his fingers drumming impatiently on the table. Evan Caldwell, 28, was the heir to Caldwell Technologies, a tech empire that dominated Silicon Valley. His life was a parade of private schools, yacht vacations, and a penthouse that overlooked the city like a king's throne. But beneath the polish, Evan was restless. His adoptive father, Richard Caldwell, had built a fortune, but he'd always been cagey about Evan's biological mother. The mystery gnawed at Evan, a void no amount of wealth could fill. "Good evening, sir," Tasha said, her voice warm despite her fatigue. "Can I start you with something to drink?" Evan barely looked up from his phone, where emails from the board meeting still burned in his mind. "Coke. Make it quick." His tone was sharp, his blue eyes cold. Tasha nodded and turned away, her sneakers squeaking faintly against the polished floor. The bar was slammed, the kitchen a chaos of shouted orders. By the time she returned with the glass, 12 minutes had passed. Evan's jaw tightened as she set it down. "Are you kidding me?" he snapped, his voice loud enough to draw eyes. "What took so damn long? Do you think I'm here to wait on you?" Tasha's stomach twisted, but she kept her composure, a skill honed over years of biting her tongue. "I'm so sorry, sir. It's a busy night. Can I get you anything else?" Evan leaned back, his gaze cutting. "Yeah, how about some actual service?" The words were a slap, but Tasha had heard worse. She turned to leave, but Evan's frustration boiled over. In a flash of anger, he grabbed the glass and hurled it at her. The coke splashed across her chest, soaking her uniform and dripping onto the floor. Ice cubes skittered across the marble. Gasps rippled through the restaurant, and a hush fell over the nearby tables. Tasha froze, the cold liquid seeping into her skin like a public shaming. Her heart pounded, her eyes stung, but she refused to cry. Not here, not in front of him. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though the words felt like betrayal. She grabbed a napkin, wiped her hands, and walked away, her head high but her soul bruised. Evan watched her go, a flicker of guilt crossing his face before he shoved it down. He didn't know her name. He didn't care. She was just a waitress, a faceless part of his evening. He signaled for the check, eager to leave the scene behind. The incident clung to Tasha like a shadow. For days, she replayed it in her mind. The splash of soda, the sting of humiliation, the way the other patrons had stared. At home, in the cramped apartment she shared with Ruth, she scrubbed her uniform until her knuckles were raw, but the stain on her pride wouldn't fade. She confided in her grandmother one evening, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea. "Why do they think they can treat me like that?" Tasha asked, her voice trembling. Like I'm nothing. Ruth, her gray hair pulled into a tight bun, reached across the table, her calloused hands warm against Tasha's. Because the world's built to lift some up and keep others down, baby. But you're stronger than they know. You've got your mother's fire. Tasha's chest tightened at the mention of Lena. She rarely spoke of her mother, the pain of her absence too raw. What was she like, Grandma? Really? Ruth's eyes softened, but there was a guarded edge to her voice. Lena was a dreamer, like you. But she got caught up in things too big for her. Loved a man she shouldn't have. It broke her. Tasha wanted to press further, but Ruth changed the subject, as she always did when Lena's name came up. Instead, Tasha retreated to her room, pulling out her sketchbook. Her pencil danced across the page, creating bold lines and vibrant colors, a world where she wasn't invisible. She dreamed of studying design at UCLA, of building a career where her talent, not her race or status, defined her. But dreams didn't pay the rent, and so she returned to Lucille each night, swallowing her pride for the sake of her future. Across the city, Evan was unraveling in his own way. The image of the waitress's face, her calm in the face of his outburst, haunted him. He wasn't a cruel man, but privilege had insulated him from the consequences of his actions. In his sleek downtown penthouse, he poured a whiskey and stared at the city skyline, the lights blurring into his thoughts. His father's empire was his by birthright, but the questions about his origins were louder than ever. Who was his mother? Why had Richard always deflected his questions with a curt, "It doesn't matter"? Evan's curiosity became an obsession. He hired a private investigator, a discreet man named Victor who promised answers. "Give me a week," Victor said. "I'll dig into your father's past." Meanwhile, Tasha's world shifted on a quiet Wednesday afternoon. She was wiping down tables during a slow shift when her best friend, Maya, a hostess at Lucille, pulled her into the break room. Maya's eyes were wide, her voice a hushed whisper. "Tasha, you're not gonna believe what I heard." Tasha frowned, setting down her rag. "What?" Maya leaned closer, her words tumbling out. "You know that guy who threw the drink at you? Evan Caldwell? My cousin works for his dad's company, and she overheard something wild. Tasha, your mom, Lena, was with Richard Caldwell back in the day. Like, with him. They had an affair." Tasha's breath caught. "What are you talking about?" Maya's voice dropped lower. "It was before you were born. My cousin says Lena got pregnant, and, Tasha, you're their kid. You're Richard Caldwell's daughter." The words hit like a tidal wave. Tasha's knees buckled, and she gripped the edge of the table. Her mother, the woman who'd vanished, had been with a billionaire? And Tasha was their child? Her mind raced, piecing together fragments of her life, Ruth's cryptic warnings about rich folks, the way Lena's name was a taboo subject. And then, the final, devastating realization. If she was Richard Caldwell's daughter, then Evan, the man who'd humiliated her, was her half-brother. She stumbled home that night, her thoughts a storm. In her grandmother's apartment, she dug through an old cedar chest, finding the faded photograph of Lena standing beside a man who looked strikingly like an older Evan. Ruth found her there, tears streaming down her face. "Is it true?" Tasha whispered. "Is Richard Caldwell my father?" Ruth sighed, her shoulders sagging. Lena loved him, Tasha. But he was married, had a whole life she couldn't touch. She left when she found out she was pregnant. Didn't want you growing up in his shadow, or worse, rejected by his world. She thought it was better this way. Tasha's heart broke. She was the daughter of a billionaire, but she'd grown up dodging bullets in South Central, fighting for every scrap of respect. The injustice burned, a fire that threatened to consume her. For days, Tasha wrestled with her discovery. Part of her wanted to storm into Evan's perfect life, to demand answers, to make him see her. Another part wanted to bury the truth, to protect herself from the rejection she'd faced her entire life. She'd spent 24 years being invisible. Why risk more pain now? But the secret was too big, too heavy. It demanded to be spoken. Evan, meanwhile, was chasing his own answers. Victor, the investigator, called with a lead. Your father was involved with a woman named Lena Williams in the late 90s, he said. She was a singer, worked at a jazz club downtown. They were close for a year, maybe more. Then she disappeared. I'm still digging. The name Lena Williams meant nothing to Evan, but it lit a spark. He felt closer to the truth than ever, yet more lost. His life, private jets, boardrooms, penthouses, felt hollow. He thought of the waitress again, the guilt resurfacing. He didn't know why she lingered in his mind, but she did. Tasha made her decision on a rainy Thursday evening. She couldn't keep living in the shadows. Using Maya's cousin's connections, she found Evan's email and sent a message. We need to talk. It's about your father. Meet me at the Pier Cafe in Santa Monica, 7 p.m. tomorrow. Her hands shook as she hit send. The cafe was a quiet haven, far from the glitz of Lucille. Tasha arrived early, her sketchbook tucked under her arm for comfort. She wore a simple sweater and jeans, her hair pulled back, her heart pounding. When Evan walked in, he looked different, less polished, more human, his eyes shadowed with fatigue. He recognized her immediately, and his face flushed with shame. You're the waitress, he said, sliding into the booth across from her. I'm sorry about what happened at the restaurant. I was out of line. Tasha's jaw tightened. She wanted to lash out, to tell him how his actions had cut deeper than he could know. But she swallowed her anger. That's not why I'm here. She took a deep breath and told him everything. The affair, her mother, the secret of her birth. Evan listened, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to something raw, something broken. You're saying, we're siblings, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Tasha nodded, her throat tight. I didn't know either. Not until a few days ago. The conversation that followed was raw, unfiltered, real. Tasha spoke of her life, the slurs she'd endured, the job she'd worked to survive, the dreams she'd buried to keep going. I've spent my whole life fighting to be seen, she said, her voice steady but fierce. And then you threw that drink at me, like I was nothing. Evan flinched, his hands clenching. I didn't know, he said. I didn't know who you were. I didn't even know who I was. He told her about his own emptiness, the questions about his mother, the pressure of a life mapped out for him. I've had everything handed to me, he admitted. But it's never felt like enough. And now, this. They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of their shared blood settling between them. Tasha wanted to hate him, but she saw the pain in his eyes, the cracks in his perfect facade. Evan wanted to fix it, but he didn't know how. Forgiveness was a jagged path. Tasha grappled with her anger, not just at Evan, but at the world that had lifted him up while keeping her down. She thought of the years she'd spent proving her worth, only to be dismissed because of her race, her class, her existence. Evan, meanwhile, wrestled with guilt. He'd spent his life blind to the struggles of others, and now his own sister was a living reminder of his ignorance. They met again over the next few weeks, each conversation a step toward understanding. Evan offered to introduce Tasha to their father, to bring her into his world. Tasha hesitated. She didn't want a handout, didn't want to be defined by his wealth. But she also knew she deserved more than a life of scraping by. She'd earned her place, not through blood, but through grit. One evening, Tasha confronted Richard Caldwell at his sprawling Bel Air mansion. The tech mogul was a towering figure, his presence commanding, but Tasha didn't flinch. She stood in his study, her voice steady as she told him who she was. Richard's face paled, his polished demeanor crumbling. Lena, he murmured, his voice heavy with regret. She never told me. He offered apologies, explanations, promises of money. Tasha cut him off. I'm not here for your pity, she said. I'm here to be seen. I'm your daughter, whether you wanted me or not. The words hung in the air, a declaration of her existence. Richard nodded, his eyes glistening. I want to make this right, he said. Whatever you need. Tasha didn't need his money, but she needed a chance. She took a job at Caldwell Technologies as a graphic designer, a role she'd earned through her portfolio, not her lineage. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. The wounds of her past wouldn't heal overnight, and her relationship with Evan was still fragile. But it was a start. Evan, too, began to change. He used his influence to push for diversity initiatives at Caldwell Technologies, a small step toward dismantling the privilege he'd taken for granted. He and Tasha met for coffee every few weeks, their conversations awkward but honest. They were strangers bound by blood, learning to navigate a relationship neither had expected. In her new office, Tasha sat at her desk, sketching a campaign for the company's latest product. The city stretched out beyond her window, vast and unforgiving, but for the first time, she felt like she belonged. She was no longer invisible. Her future wasn't guaranteed, but it was hers to shape. And in the fragile bond forming with her brother, she found a piece of the family she'd never known she needed. The journey wasn't over. There were still wounds to heal, truths to face. But as Tasha's pencil moved across the page, she felt a spark of hope. She was Tasha Williams, daughter of Lena, granddaughter of Ruth, sister of Evan. And she was finally, undeniably, seen.